Okay, so the traditional way to display frequency distributions as charts is using histograms. So, and these are basically column charts that show you how your data lies over a series of bins. So let's just select our newly created frequencies in the cells Y18 down to Y38. Make sure you've got them all encompassed there. And then click on the Insert tab at the top of our screen, or it could in older versions of Excel, particularly on a Mac, it can be hidden in a submenu, but go Insert and then over to Charts, and we're going to choose a 2D column chart. So just simply one of these like this, first one here. There is a histogram option that will try and do this automatically for you, but I think it's worthwhile showing you how you could do it from scratch. So just get this out of the way, because we'll be coming back to this table in a moment by repositioning the chart down here, just underneath it. And then double click on the chart title straight away, and let's rename this. Let's name it Government, be clear, come on, Government Health Spending per capita in real, it's adjusted for inflation now, US dollars, we better go the other way, US dollar, and then give the date range 1995 to 2010. Great. Now right click on one of the columns, any one of them, and click Format Data Series. And this brings up our options over to the right. Now traditionally on histograms, the columns are shown very close together, so you get a sense of the overall wave or distribution of the data. So let's set this gap width over here to just 5%, since we want them to be really close, and press enter, and you can see that the columns, the gap between them has gone together. So next we're going to set the maximum value for our vertical axis here. So right click on this vertical axis and you can go Format Axis. It's already, it brings up the most relevant options here for you. And what we want to do is set our maximum here to 100. Okay. Now it's really important that you have the same minimum maximum bounds on this vertical axis. If you're comparing multiple graphs, so if you're going to do, we've got one for the overall period at the moment, but in a moment we're going to do ones for each of the sub-periods. To make those compatible with each other, we need them to have consistent axes so that we don't mislead our readers. If we were to change the bin size though and do a kind of different series of graphs that were maybe focusing more on this lower end of the distribution more, or giving us more, breaking this down into smaller categories, then we'd obviously probably need to revisit the min and maxes to see which was best suitable for the graphs that we were making. But if you're comparing things across the same size bins just in different time periods, then make sure you've got consistent bounds on your minimum maximum boundaries on your vertical axes. So our next job is to get these bin labels working properly so that they aren't just numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that they reflect the bin values that we've got here, or the bin widths. So click on the chart as a whole, come over to Design. If you've got this on Excel, on Mac, as we've said before, sometimes these are put together just under a single chart menu, and go Select Data. So you should be familiar with this from last week's task. And this brings up a dialog box that looks like this, Select Data Source, and we are going to click on Edit the Horizontal Axis Labels, so these here. Click Edit. We're going to select our bin labels that are currently lying in column X, and we're going to press OK to close the dialog, and OK again. And then we should just check that that's gone okay. Yep, we've got all of our categories, and if we want we can just hover over and check the value as 29 for our top category. Yep, and that makes sense. So select the graph again, and if you have the Design tab open here, or as I said, combined one in Excel, you should have a button somewhere that says Add Chart Element. You could also do this via a shortcut on your graph here, but from up here now, And then we want to add to get an axis title, and we want it to be the primary vertical one. So we want to tell people what this represents. And we can now click on that axis title and rename it frequency of countries or frequency of nations, I guess, but countries is fine for here, and just click off the chart. And then repeat that step by adding in a horizontal axis title, and we're going to call this, importantly to remind our readers what these numbers actually represent, less than or equal to, just move that so you can see, US dollars. Okay, so people now be able to look at our chart and should be able to understand that in this column here, we've got very few countries, that we've got 2 in fact that are lying in the less than or equal to $700 bin, but that in reality means $651 up to $700. I think actually I would probably correct that by just putting that in brackets. So what our chart seems to show then is that most of our countries are clustered at the lower end of our range, but a few spend considerably more, and I guess that's probably what we expected. Now remember, there's quite a lot of visual distortion going on here. The final column, greater than 1,000, as I've said, looks a lot taller than those around it, but remember that's because it's covering a much broader range of values from 1,001 to 6,000 almost, well, nearly 7,000 actually, dollars potentially. So this is a side effect of it being a much wider bin, but we needed that because we couldn't have possibly carried on, or in theory we could have carried on with $50 increments, but it would be a very long graph with hardly any data in the later sections. So we had to make a sacrifice, and it's important that we put this here as greater than 1,000 so our readers can understand why that's likely to look taller. Some people might choose to omit this entirely and just say I'm only showing you data of less than $1,000 in this graph. Sorry, less than or equal to $1,000. Now, if we were to recalculate this as we're going to do to show change over time within our sub-period, so instead of this being 95 to 2010, we had one for the first sub-period of 95 to 98, and then another for 99 to 2002, and we kept everything the same, so with the formatting and everything here, so it was up to 100, and the bin widths we're going to keep the same in this table, and we saw the data in our graph shifting visually over to these later categories, and these categories growing and the initial one shrinking. We'd be able to see that over time the distribution of our countries has moved upwards, or perhaps there's a split in them, but we'd be able to visually see the kind of change in our data, provided that we hold the bin widths equal. We don't change these between our between our different sub-periods, and we hold and the same for our minimum maximum on the vertical axis in particular. Now it'd be a simplification again, because remember this 50 category is containing a lot of variation, and so are these. Considerably less variation perhaps than some of these categories up here. So we'd need to be careful about our conclusions, but we can at least look at change over time in this way. And that's what I ask you to do in your workshop assessment task this week, is to start off by recalculating some of this data per year and then creating some frequency distribution tables. Sorry, not per year, per sub-period. Okay, so you should now know then how to create a basic histogram and the frequency table that has the data that drives that. And I'm expecting to see some of these in your assessed project.